Since as long as we can remember, society has run by the same old high school standards. Male virgin, a loser. Female virgin, an angel from above. What the f*** is up with that? We've all heard the fun little saying tossed around by old men at a bar. A master key can open many locks, but a shitty lock is opened by many keys. This saying encapsulates a very damaging way of thinking about sex and virginity that almost everyone has experienced in some shape or form. If you're a guy, you either sleep around a lot and are the man, or you're a virgin and therefore a loser. While if you're a girl and you decide to have sex with a lot of people, you're suddenly a slut. But if you're a virgin, you're pure. In other words, if you're not exactly what society expects, you get a nice big old bucket of shame. So I think it's important to ask, why the f*** does society care if you f***? And to figure this out, we're gonna have to go back to the Middle Ages. A more noble time when lords and ladies smelled like buttholes and young female virgins were exchanged between families during marriage for money. Ooh, I love romance! See, for much of Western history, marriage was not really about love, like, at all. It was largely an economic transaction between families. And before paternity tests and the Maury Show existed, the main way men could assure that their kids were actually theirs was to take a virgin bride. So virginity became linked to an economic value, and all kinds of tests were invented to ensure a woman's virginity. You want me to show you a blood-soaked bedsheet to prove that I'm a virgin? Really? Soaked? And if you think the idea of virginity being worth money and virginity testing as some relic of the past, consider that some women have recently sold their virginity online for millions of dollars, and that the United Nations spoke out against virginity testings in 2014. And while there is absolutely nothing wrong with the choice to remain a virgin, the flip side of putting such an extreme value on virginity is, you guessed it, slut shaming. And in our society, it seems like all you need to do to get slut shamed is, I don't know, be a woman? Like any type. Lesbian, gender non-conforming, white, cis, trans, woman of color, and if you mix and match these, the slut shaming gets worse. But slut shaming is more than just being mean. Enforcing rules on women and how they're allowed to use their own bodies is a tactic of asserting control over them, and that has really negative consequences. A 2011 survey found that 46% of high school girls have experienced slut shaming, and many girls who have been slut shamed have body image issues. Even depression, anxiety, and other mental health struggles are linked to slut shaming. And all slut shaming works from the central premise that a woman choosing to have sex with any number of people is somehow bad or wrong. It's not good or bad, it's just a personal choice. And before you jump into the comments and say, well, what about men? Well, yes, let's talk about how this double standard impacts men. Because mathematically, if all these women are having sex, and some of them are having sex with men, then that means that there are men out there that are also having sex. Are the men sluts too? See, there's a twist. Society insisting that men need to be aggressive, violent, and constantly having sex also harms them. Because just as overly sexualizing women reduces them to merely sexual objects, overly sexualizing men and tying their masculinity to the number of people they've slept with also reduces them to sexual objects. So how did this thinking even come about? Are men actually more inclined to want sex than women? Well, there is a generalized assumption that men have a higher sex drive than women, and while some research has borne that out, there's a problem with the near constant drumbeat of all men have higher sex drives than women. These studies generally rely on averages, and while averages are helpful for getting a general picture, an individual man's sexual desire is dependent on a whole slew of factors, including, but not limited to, culture, religion, early childhood experiences, his testosterone levels, his oxytocin receptors, his dopamine D4 receptor gene variants, and a whole bunch of other sciencey that I don't even understand. In short, hashtag not all men are trying to 24/7. And that's totally cool, and frankly, a bit of a relief because that sounds exhausting. Plus, if we teach men that sexual aggression and conquest of women are the barometers of manhood, whether it's in movies, music, or just plain old schoolyard bullying, this leads to difficulty for guys who don't fit into that mold. What if you're a serial monogamist? What if you're asexual? Or what if you're gay? The answer is, all those things are cool. You do you, bruh. And while it may not be as systemic, the thinking also leads to shaming men for being virgins. I mean, how many movies have we seen about guys desperately trying to lose their virginity? Seriously, it feels like there's at least one every year. And recently, Wendy Williams slammed a 26-year-old contestant on The Bachelorette for revealing that he is a virgin, going so far as to say, "I don't trust people that have never had sex." I mean, my dog has never had sex and she's the most trustworthy person I know. Because constantly reinforcing the notion that a man's power relies on sex and that they're entitled to sex while simultaneously teaching them that aggression and anger is masculine and they should feel shame if they're not having sex is the perfect recipe for misogynist disaster. Which is how we end up with incels. Incels, or involuntarily celibates, are extreme examples of angry dudes who are mad that Scarlett Johansson or anyone else won't hook up with them. So mad that they've committed violent acts that are basically domestic terrorism. So yeah, I would say this whole obsession with men and women's virginity is kind of a big deal. At the end of the day, it's up to you to decide whether you want to have a lot of sex with a lot of different partners, no sex at all, or somewhere in between that makes sense to who you are right now. But if women are only allowed to be sluts or pure angels, and if men are only allowed to be losers or sex studs, we're leaving very little room for any of us to breathe, which isn't cool. Unless that's what you and your partner are into. In that case, make sure you play it safe. And we'll see you next time right here on Decoded.